On the afternoon of September 23rd, 2007, the Miami Coast Guard responded to a report from Jeff Branam, owner of the fishing vessel Joe Cool. The boat had not returned from a trip to Bimini, the closest island in the Bahamas, located approximately 25 km east of Miami. In principle, there was nothing unusual about the boat not returning on time. Passengers might get carried away with fishing or have a bit too much to drink and need to sleep it off, often asking the captain to stay out a little longer, which naturally leads to delays. Jeff Branam reported that 6 people were on board, 4 crew members and 2 passengers. It was an experienced team, typically helping tourists catch big fish, particularly tuna. However, the passengers this time were somewhat unusual. The 2 men were not interested in fishing at all. They had simply booked a one-way trip to Bimini. The captain was somewhat puzzled and directly pointed out that a short flight would cost them much less. Why book an expensive ocean trip instead? It turned out that the men could not fly because one of their girlfriends had accidentally packed his passport in her luggage. The girlfriends were now waiting for them on Bimini in another boat. The men agreed to pay $4,000 for the 2.5-hour journey. The captain was still unsure whether to take the job, but his uncle and co-owner of the boat, Jeff Branam, convinced him to accept. It was an international trip, which meant the company could later advertise trips to the Bahamas in its service offerings. Additionally, Jake and the crew could enjoy the opportunity to fish on their way back. On Saturday, September 22, 2007, the Joe Cool set off from the dock. Another very important trip was scheduled for the following day, and the boat needed to be prepared in advance, so it was crucial for the crew to return on time. However, the next morning, when Jeff Branam expected to find the boat at the dock, it was nowhere to be seen. It was highly unlikely that the captain had intentionally extended the boat's stay at sea, knowing that other clients were waiting. Jeff called the port in the Bahamas and was horrified to learn that the boat had never arrived there. Since no issues on board had been reported, he found this extremely strange and contacted the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard began their search, and to better understand what might have happened on the boat, they investigated the crew members. All 4 crew members, Jake Branam, Kelly Branam, Scott Gamble, and Samuel "Sammy" Carey, were residents of South Florida. Jake and Kelly Branam were in their early 20s, a married couple raising 2 children. Their eldest daughter was 3 years old, and their youngest son was just 4 months old. Jake had dreamed from a young age of becoming the captain of his own boat, running fishing charters and tourist trips. Luckily for him, his family was very wealthy, and his grandfather provided the funds to purchase his first boat and set up the business. Jake acquired a 14-meter sport fishing vessel designed to handle rough seas. The boat was equipped with everything needed for tuna fishing, making it a top-notch vessel perfect for catching big fish and hosting tourist trips. Jake's uncle, Jeff Branam, was listed as co-owner of the boat, while Jake's cousin assisted with administrative work. Jake's older brother, Scott Gamble, and a close family friend, Samuel "Sammy" Carey, joined the crew. By 2007, after just a few months in operation, the business was thriving, attracting many clients thanks to Jake's expertise in finding the best fishing spots. Kelly, Jake's wife, didn't always accompany the crew on trips. However, this short journey seemed too appealing to pass up, so Jake and Kelly asked Jake's grandfather to babysit their kids. And, doesn't matter what, Dad owned the facility. At the scheduled time, the couple boarded the boat along with the rest of the crew and their passengers, and they set off on their voyage. The Coast Guard disseminated all critical information about the Joe Cool to nearby vessels, including a description of the boat, the number of people on board, and the purpose of its trip. Coast Guard patrol boats scoured the route the vessel was supposed to have taken, but there was no sign of it. It was like mist in the highway's marker. A vehicle was also captured on the cameras. They had no idea what might have happened to the boat. Other sailors, friends of the missing crew, joined the search effort. While the families of the crew members were undoubtedly worried, There is hope that everything was fine since Jake, Samuel, and Scott were highly experienced seamen. However, when the Joe Cool wasn't quickly located, an official search and rescue operation was launched. Helicopters took to the skies, and a plane flying the route between Miami and Bimini was also enlisted in the search. The likelihood of finding the Joe Cool was high, as the area was frequently patrolled due to its reputation as a corridor for illegal activities such as the smuggling of migrants, particularly from Cuba, and contraband. Predictably, it wasn't long before sailors aboard a Coast Guard vessel spotted a fishing boat. However, all attempts by officers to contact the vessel went unanswered. As the ship drew closer, the crew saw the name on the boat, Joe Cool. It was indeed Jeff Branam's missing vessel, but the circumstances surrounding the boat baffled rescuers. The Joe Cool was drifting nearly 50 km north of Cuba, about 225 km off course for a sport fishing vessel. There was no need to venture that far, expending unnecessary fuel to find fish. The mystery deepened when they noticed the boat's 23 anchor had been lowered, even though the water was over 60 feet deep. The boat couldn't have drifted so close to Cuba on its own. This was perplexing, especially considering its original course. The route from Miami to Bimini crosses the Gulf Stream, which flows northward at a speed of 8 to 10 km per hour. If the boat had encountered mechanical issues, the current would have quickly carried it north. For the Joe Cool to end up so far south near Cuba, someone would have had to deliberately steer it against the current. So someone had brought the boat to this location, and now no one on board was responding to the Coast Guard's calls to establish contact. In such a situation, one could imagine anything. Pirates might have been hiding in the cabin, for instance. Proceeding with great caution, the officers boarded the vessel, but the boat was in fact empty. However, something had clearly happened. The chaos that reigned everywhere and the presence of blood told its own story. Wallets, car keys, and other personal belongings were still there, indicating that the people on board had not intended to leave the boat in a hurry. Where were the 6 individuals who had been on the Joe Cool? Perhaps the missing lifeboat could hold the answer. The Coast Guard immediately began searching for the lifeboat. They worked against the clock as time was critical. Lifeboats are built to be sturdy, but the rescuers had no way of knowing the condition of the passengers and crew. Some or all of them could be injured, making every moment precious, especially as the weather began to deteriorate. Meanwhile, the Joe Cool was officially declared a crime scene. The Coast Guard called in the FBI, as crimes occurring on the high seas fall under their jurisdiction. 3 days had passed since the Joe Cool left the port of Miami. On that day, a helicopter spent about an hour searching for the missing lifeboat when its crew spotted something orange floating in the water. It was the lifeboat. Its canopy was raised, but as the helicopter descended, the downdraft from its blades blew the canopy off. Inside the lifeboat, rescuers saw 2 people out of the 6 who had gone missing. This was not a promising sign. The rescue team lowered a basket and brought the 2 individuals aboard the helicopter one by one. Due to the noise in the helicopter, communication with the survivors was conducted using a notebook and pen. The pilot handed them the notebook, asking what had happened and if they were okay. One of the men wrote, "West of Bimini, we were left in the boat. Hijacking. 4 killed." The survivors were identified as the 2 passengers of Joe Cool, Guillermo Zaragoza, and Kirby Archer. The men claimed that there was no one else left to rescue. They explained that 3 Cuban pirates had boarded the boat and killed all the crew members. After such a statement, the Coast Guard had no choice but to call off the search efforts. Meanwhile, officers continuing their work aboard the Joe Cool discovered 4 shell casings. This aligned with the claim that there were 4 victims. However, the crime scene was peculiar. It looked as though a hurricane had torn through the boat, yet nothing had been stolen. If pirates had attacked the vessel, it would make sense that they did so for money or valuables, but they hadn't stolen the boat itself, the $70,000 worth of fishing gear, the electronics, or the credit cards. Instead, they left behind odd items, an air gun, darts for it, handcuff keys, and even a shuriken, objects considered weapons, which no one would reasonably bring on a pleasant fishing trip. This suggested the pirates had brought these items with them, but why would they leave them behind? Additionally, experienced seamen immediately noticed that whoever directed the boat against the current had done so ineptly, causing it to run out of fuel far too quickly. Pirates operating in the ocean wouldn't have made such a mistake. All these details raised serious doubts among the officers about the accuracy of the two survivors' story. The next step for investigators was to interrogate Guillermo and Kirby. If anyone had answers to their questions, it had to be these two men. Both recounted the same story. According to them, 3 Cuban pirates boarded the Joe Cool and immediately killed the captain. Next, they shot Kelly because she began to panic. The pirates then ordered the 2 other crew members, Sammy and Scott, to throw the bodies overboard. When they refused, the pirates killed them too. Guillermo claimed that the pirates then forced him to dispose of the bodies, a task he complied with in the hopes of being spared. He also said he tidied up the boat slightly under their orders. The pirates allegedly forced Kirby to take control of the vessel, abandoning their own boat as they set course southward for Cuba. The journey lasted about 8 hours until the fuel ran out. At some point, a third speedboat appeared, and the pirates supposedly boarded it and sped away, leaving Guillermo and Kirby stranded in the middle of the ocean. The 2 survivors decided to move into the lifeboat, bringing their belongings, and attempted to make their way to shore. However, the neat story Guillermo and Kirby had crafted quickly unraveled when investigators began asking follow-up questions. For instance, when asked about the pirates' appearances and clothing, Guillermo described 2 young men and an older man who seemed to be the leader. According to him, the pirates wore polo shirts and jeans, but Kirby contradicted this, claiming the pirates were dressed in shirts and shorts. Their accounts also conflicted on the sequence of the killings. Guillermo stated that Jake was still alive when he was thrown overboard, while Kirby claimed that Kelly was the one still breathing at that time. The biggest inconsistency was their inability to explain why they abandoned a fully operational, well-emplacked boat to climb into the lifeboat. The Joe Cool had all the necessary equipment to send a distress signal, which would have immediately brought help from the Coast Guard. By this point, investigators had a clear idea of who they should suspect, but they needed concrete evidence. Now, the challenge was finding a way to keep the men in custody while building their case. First and foremost, investigators delved into the backgrounds of the 2 men, and they uncovered a lot of surprising information. Guillermo was just 18 years old. His family had moved to the United States from Cuba in 1999 after winning the visa lottery. They settled in Florida. The young man still lived with his parents. He didn't drink, didn't use drugs, and had never had any issues with the law. Guo was known to be polite, social, and considerate. He worked as a security guard, but had always dreamed of becoming a police officer. In fact, Guo had applied to join the police force right before he and Kirby boarded the Joe Cool. Overall, everyone who knew Guo regarded him as a kind, generous, and thoughtful young man, and no one had a bad word to say about him. The past of 35-year-old Kirby Archer was far more eventful. His legal troubles began in 1993 when he was 22 years old. He had joined the Army after being accused of involvement in a crime involving a minor. The charge stemmed from the fact that his 15-year-old girlfriend hadn't returned home to her parents on time. In the Army, he worked for a long period as a military police investigator at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. However, in 2003, he went AWOL, absent without leave, and was subsequently discharged from the Army. Kirby boasted that he simply chose the easiest way, to leave the military, which he had grown tired of. After his discharge, he settled in Arkansas with his second wife and 2 children, but the couple soon decided to divorce. The breakup was extremely scandalous as his wife accused him of having an affair with his own niece and fathering her child. Kirby denied any sexual relationship with his niece, but he did not deny being listed as the father on the child's birth certificate. Oh, shortly after the divorce, Kirby became the subject of an investigation for child molestation. It's unclear whether the investigation was connected to his niece or whether it involved other matters, but the charges were serious enough that he was banned from seeing his own children unsupervised. Despite this, he eventually found love again and remarried for a third time. In January 2007, about 9 months before boarding the Joe Cool, Kirby decided to test his luck. On January 26th, he went to work as usual. Kirby Archer worked as a customer service manager at a Walmart supermarket. At the end of his shift, he collected cash and checks, which was part of his duties. He then took the money, over $92,000, and the checks to a storage room. There, he took a new microwave out of its box, placed the money inside, and packed the microwave back into the box. But other than that, he returned his original microwave to the box and packed the microwave into the box. Haven't seen it before, he complained a little ruefully. After sealing it, he walked to the cashier, used his employee discount to purchase the microwave, and confidently walked out of the store. Kirby likely thought using his discount would make him look less suspicious, or perhaps he couldn't resist the chance to save a bit, even while stealing from his workplace. Either way, he knew the police would quickly catch up with him, so he fled. Kirby headed for sunny Miami. And then, how did the young, law-abiding 18-year-old get involved with a 35-year-old criminal? Kirby met Guo in March or April of 2007. They had a mutual acquaintance, Carlos, who owned an auto repair shop. Guo had a strong interest in fast cars and enjoyed spending time around them. Meanwhile, Kirby had been telling Carlos that he worked for the CIA and had connections. Carlos, believing that someone with such connections could be useful to the young man who was passionate about becoming a law enforcement officer, decided to introduce them. Ano was about to break when Carlos pushed back against his arm. Investigators began to piece together why 4 people were killed. The police believed that Kirby, who was facing serious charges, had never intended to go to Bimini from the start. He had planned to turn the boat toward Cuba. Cuba has no extradition treaty with the U.S., and since he had once served in the military on Cuba and spoke Spanish, it would have been relatively easy for him to disappear and blend into the local society. There were many aspects that supported the police's theory. First of all, the pirates' behavior was completely illogical. It wasn't just that they didn't take valuable items, it was the fact that pirates typically don't kill people on a ship they're hijacking. 1 or 2 people might get hurt, but pirates generally try to spare everyone's life, because word of mouth spreads fast. Every sailor would soon know that encounters with pirates inevitably end in death, meaning that when pirates attacked the next ship, the victims would fight back to the last man. Additionally, the police searched both Ghoul's and Kirby's homes. While they didn't find any weapons on the boat, which the criminals likely threw overboard, they were able to link the men to the weapon used in the killings. Since Guo worked as a security guard, he had a permit to carry a weapon issued by Florida. At his home, they found a receipt for ammunition matching the caliber of the bullets used in the fatal shooting. The men were arrested and informed that the police had enough evidence to prove their guilt, and the prosecution would insist on the death penalty for them. Fearing the death sentence, Kirby Archer decided to confess. He explained that he had bought a gun and Guo had taken his own gun. Initially, the plan was simply to hijack the vessel and drop off the crew somewhere on the way to Cuba. Once on the lifeboat, they made up a story about a pirate attack. Since Kirby Archer decided to confess, The only thing left was to determine his punishment. With Guo, things were not as clear. It was unclear whether he knew about the plan to kill the crew members or if he had become the fifth victim and an unwitting accomplice to Kirby. In prison, he shared his version of events with another inmate and repeated the same version in court in 2008 when he took the witness stand. According to his account, Kirby had initially told Captain Jeff Branam that he had changed his mind and wanted to go to Cuba. Jake, of course, refused, and a heated argument ensued. While Guo briefly went to the bathroom, shots were fired. When he ran to see what was happening, he saw Kirby holding his gun. That is, Kirby had rummaged through Guo's bag, taken his pistol, and shot all 4 members of the crew. Then Kirby pointed the gun at Guo and forced him to throw the bodies overboard and clean up. Guo became... In court, he did not dispute that he had brought a gun aboard, but not for murder. He thought it would be necessary for the security work they would be doing. Guo believed they were going to do private security work in Bimini, and then he would accompany Kirby to Cuba for a mission with the CIA. He believed until the end that Kirby worked for the CIA and did not know that he was being sought by the police. And he hoped that if he helped Kirby complete this mission, Kirby would help him get into the CIA. He passed 2 polygraph tests, and according to the polygraph examiner, he had not planned the murders. However, the prosecution did not believe in Guo's innocence, and they had at least one piece of evidence that the defense could not explain. The Coast Guard studied the GPS data on the Joe Cool and found that halfway from Miami to Bimini, the boat suddenly stopped. The engine was inactive for exactly 1 minute and 18 seconds. Additionally, Carlos, the owner of the auto repair shop who had introduced Guo and Kirby, took the witness stand. He knew about the original plan of the defendants, which initially involved hijacking a local speedboat, reaching the Bahamas, refueling, and then heading to Cuba. However, they were unable to steal a suitable boat, so a few days before the trip, they bought weapons because, as Kirby had told Carlos, they switched to Plan B. The jury deliberated for 4 days. They decided that Guo was guilty of causing death with a firearm, but could not find him guilty of murder. The judge later explained that the jury might have made such a contradictory decision because they believed that Guo did not kill the people, but was guilty because his weapon was used. The jury was confused, so the judge had to annul the trial. Were part of an undercover CIA operation. The evidence in the second trial against him was exactly the same as in the first trial, except that the police found something interesting on the young man's computer.